Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to assume if I don't get any messages in our chat that is a yes. Awesome. Hi, Billy. Hi, everyone. I really like to see all these familiar faces, well, names anyways, on our webinar this morning. So thank you very much for the feedback. We have began recording, so if you joined us just a few moments earlier, the recording has begun. And if you've been with us for a few minutes longer, you'll see that there's lots of people joining us today. So welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Domestic Abuse and Injustice Summit. This is the first ever Economic Abuse Conference, and we're thrilled that you've decided to join us. We recognize that today is quite a long day. We have sessions on the hour until 5 o'clock with our closing. So don't worry if you can't attend the entire day. This session and all other sessions are going to be recorded as noted in our banner there. The only session that will not be recorded is the fireside chat. So this session is a networking opportunity for anyone who wants to stay on or share their story. If you have lived experience, whether as a survivor or if you work directly with survivors or victims, we really hope that you can stay with us at 1 o'clock Eastern time. We're thrilled again that you are able to join us today. My name is Natalie Martin, and I'm the Director of Communications for CCFWE. As I said, these sessions are going to be recorded and available to you after today as well. We will be sharing the recordings with everyone. Just if you've been with us for a while, if you've been a supporter of us for a while, a few years now, you know that we are the only national organization, a nonprofit organization in Canada dedicating to fighting domestic economic abuse through education, economic empowerment, and policy change. And we're thrilled that so many experts and researchers and advocates are here with us today as moderators and as panelists. So you'll be able to join in on the conversation throughout the day. CCFWE works collaboratively with financial institutions, private stakeholders, of course, the business community, women's service organizations, lawyers, government, of course, advocates, shelters, and survivors to develop a comprehensive approach to address economic abuse. Our work is informed by lived experience, feminine, evidence-based practice, and collaboration. So we are a feminist-led organization, and much of our research is led by our own researchers, but of course we're supported by various different organizations throughout Canada. And I know many of you joining us today are coming in from across Canada, so welcome. If you're coming in from the West Coast, it's an early start for you, and if you're out on the East Coast, thank you for joining us. Like I mentioned, these sessions will be recorded. Our summit today is possible because of the support of Women and Gender Equality Canada. Our Help Us Rise month-long campaign focuses on national economic abuse awareness and advocacy system change. So if you've been following us on our social media channels, you will have noticed that we're really trying to advocate and amplify our messaging. And certainly we hope that if you're with us today, you'll continue to amplify this message. We know that this is, of course, our first ever summit coming together to advocate for better research and funding for victims of economic abuse. But we can't just come in today and then come in next year again. We have to do this every single day and continue advocating. The National Economic Abuse Awareness Day is on November 26th, and we really do hope that you'll continue to amplify our fight today and every day. So before I introduce you to the team, We're a small but very mighty team here at CCFWE. I want to ensure that everyone that's registered today, if possible, that you've completed the demographic survey that was sent out through our Eventbrite email distribution list. And it is available in the chat. I believe we provided the link, and if not, we will be providing that link in the chat. The other thing I wanted to mention today as we go through this event online, it's a virtual gathering. Some will say, hey, it's time to get together in person, but attending a virtual summit like this really allows for a greater audience. So there's benefits to both, right? Although many of us would love to see each other in person. What we are going to be doing, we do have a social media team working behind the scenes, and they're going to be tweeting live all the takeaways from today. What they are going to be doing is hopefully taking some screen grabs of our panelists and moderators. As an attendee, your image doesn't come up because we are in a webinar format. But if for some reason your image does come up, please let us know that you do not want your image to be shared on social media. But just so you know, there will be screen grabs of our different panels today because, of course, we want to amplify our voice. This is such an important topic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our executive director. I believe she's on here. So bear with us as we jump from speaker to speaker. It may take us a few seconds to get everyone on the screen. So please bear with us. Messi, are you here? Yes, she is. So I will pass it over to Mesrit, who is our executive director, to quickly introduce herself, and then I'll pass it over to the next team member. So Messi, on to you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Natalie?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for coming. It's my pleasure to welcome you. And my name is Mesret. I'm the founder of the Kenyan Center for Women Empowerment. As you all know, we are the only organization right now advocating for this very, very important and critical issue, which is economic abuse. I'm very proud and honored to lead this organization by the support of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And our next CCFWE team member to introduce themselves is Neha. I'll let her introduce herself. You're next, Neha.
Thanks so much, Natalie. And thank you everyone who's able to attend today at all the different sessions. My name is Neha Shahzad Chandrarajan. I am the Director of Research here at the CCFWE. I've worked with many of you, and I'm so proud to be able to host the summit alongside the team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Neha. Next is Dr. Snow.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Natalie Snow. I'm the research analyst here at CCFWE, and I focus on research on gender-based violence outside of my work as well. Welcome everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Snow. Really looking forward to listening to your findings and to your conversation and panel discussion that starts at noon. The next CCFWE teammate is Michaela. So I'll let you go ahead.
Michaela's still a participant, not a moderator.
Oh, okay. I will make sure to change that. Go. Is she on now? Yes, she is. There you go, Michaela.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies. My name is Michaela Meyer. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the policy analyst here at CCFWE. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michaela. Famira, who is going to be tweeting all day with her team. I will introduce you to her. Famira, do you want to introduce yourself? I've put you in not as a moderator, not as a panelist, but you can quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Famira Racy. I'm with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, helping with communications and social media. We're using social messaging to help empower survivors of economic abuse and work for deep system change and continue to advocacy for policy change and everything on multiple levels. So I'm very happy to help with social media and communications. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Famira. And like I said, if you have an opportunity to follow us on social media today, please share, tweet, follow, comment. Of course, we want to hear from everyone. So the schedule, before I move on to the schedule, I also want to introduce to you Emma, who will be participating in this event and providing us with some really interesting follow-up. So I'm just going to let Emma introduce herself, and you can tell us what you're going to be doing today during our summit.
Sure thing, thanks. Hi, my name is Emma Richard. I'm a graphic recorder, and so I'll be joining today as a witness to the event. And instead of seeing my face on the screen, you will see a canvas where I will be drawing and capturing the panels and sessions in a visual way, and then we'll have those graphics moving forward as takeaways from the conference. So I want to say thank you so much for having me join you today. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Emma. So those designs are going to be available shortly after the panels. So if you want to take a look at those, I think they just create a very creative way to capture our conversation. So thank you so much, Emma. And just to go over our schedule and any other little housekeeping that we'll be doing virtually here. The schedule obviously has started 11 a.m. Thank you for joining us promptly. We know that some of you can't stay with us all day, but again, this is going to be recorded. Every session will be recorded individually, except for the 1 p.m. fireside chat. So I'm very honored to have the University of Ottawa Chancellor, Professor Claudette Commanda here with us, and she will be kicking off this amazing summit with her opening remarks, an opening prayer, and a blessing. So do I have Claudette? I apologize. I'm looking at the attendee list, and we have quite a few of you on here, so I may not always see everyone. Is Claudette on this video? Do we have her on? Yes, we do. So I pass this over to you, Claudette. I'm very pleased to welcome you here as the first Indigenous Chancellor of the University of Ottawa. I know that your leadership and your passion and your wisdom will benefit the entire university community in Ottawa, but not only in Ottawa. I think this sends a really incredible message. So I really want to thank you, and I will pass it over to you. Yes, I will stop sharing my screen. I just wanted to make sure that she was online. So here we go. I stop sharing and I pass it over to Claudette.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. I just want to make sure that everyone hears me, because you never know with technology, right? So I gather that you do. I do see some heads are nodding and hands are going up, so that's good. So I begin by thanking you, Natalie, and to your team for the respect of the Algonquin people and inviting me in to give a welcome and what we call in our protocol a welcome blessing. And before I do the welcome blessing, I want to say thank you for those lovely words. You're very inspirational. You know, your support of me in my role as Chancellor for the First Nation or Indigenous Chancellor for the University of Ottawa. And I humbly hold that title in respect of my ancestors, in respect of my people, the Algonquin, in respect of my community, and most importantly, in respect of my family and all my relatives who have walked with me in my lifetime, who are no longer with me, but continue to stand with me, and all my relatives who continue to be with me in this physical world. I also acknowledge all the people from coast to coast to coast who are very supportive and show that great respect for First Nations people or Indigenous peoples, and providing that space for our wisdom and our knowledges and our lived experiences to be part and parcel and integral in anything relating to geopolitical or social or in the role of women in general. So thank you so much for asking me to be here and giving these opening words. I begin by acknowledging that I am on the homeland of my people, my ancestors, the Algonquin people. Ni Jenwen Daganago Mama Weniniwag and Miigwech Kakinaki Bijaye Goma Nongum Bijajig. Bienvenue à tous, bienvenue ici à la territoire non cédé de la nation algonquin, bienvenue à tout le monde ici. I bring you greetings on behalf of my family, my community of Kitigan Zibi, the Algonquin Nation, and I welcome all of you into this homeland. And I know we're meeting virtually, but I'm here physically in my people's homeland, so I welcome you. And it's important that protocol is part and parcel to anything that we do as well. I acknowledge the homelands of Indigenous peoples across this land called Canada, or the homelands of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, whether they are in this country called Canada or whether they are in a country called United States of America. Nevertheless, it's still the ancestral homeland of those first people. So we welcome you to Turtle Island. I acknowledge my ancestors, Ni Jenwen Daganago Mama Weniniwag, and I give them greetings and I thank them for all the love that they continue to show and the prayers they continue to give. I acknowledge the ancestors of all Indigenous peoples from coast to coast on this great land called Turtle Island. And I also acknowledge all of you, each and every one of you who are present here for this conference, the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. I acknowledge your ancestors as well. It is so important that we never forget our ancestors. We must never forget who we are and where we come from. And so I greet you with that kindness. I greet you with that spirit of friendship. And I greet you with my words of reconciliation. And it's so important that we come together. We come together and share our knowledges and share our strengths. So I thank you for that. It is said when we come together, as we acknowledge one another and as we invite you into our homeland, we must also, another protocol or what we call our law, is that we greet one another with that kindness of prayer, that to acknowledge that Creator who has put us here, to acknowledge all the spirit helpers, to acknowledge our ancestors, to acknowledge the grandmothers and grandfathers. That is so important. And so this welcome blessing that I will give, it's so important because we cannot do our work without that strength and that guidance that comes from the highest of powers. And so that being said, I say Chimigwej, Gishimanado, Chimigwej Kinakego. I thank the Creator for all of his blessings. Chimigwej Kokamisag, Chimigwej Mishomsag, and Navigistas Pinigan, Wido Kushning, Onje Kakina, Nongo Mishishwabong. I've acknowledged the Creator, I've acknowledged the ancestors, and I've acknowledged the grandmothers and the grandfathers from the four directions, and we've asked them to bless this meeting and to bless the work that all women who are here, the work that you're doing for community, for family, for one another, in what we call Nidangwe, or that sisterhood. And that is so important because no matter what title we hold in our families or what title we may hold in our work world, we're doing our work for the children and for families, and that's so important. So we give thanks to the Creator for blessing us with families and blessing us with children. We acknowledge that first grandmother and that first grandfather whom the Creator has blessed all peoples with. And we say, Chimigwej Kokomistipikizis, Chimigwej Mishomiskizis. We thank that grandfather's son, and the grandmother moon, as we acknowledge that first mother, that one mother, that most powerful of female strength. Together, we acknowledge our mother, the earth, and the Creator has blessed us with Mother Earth. all peoples. So we acknowledge the strength of all the women are here. Chimigwej kishimanadoki chimigwej onje ikwe wag chimigwej. Nibuksenda minopamadzuin, nibuksen nibakawin, nibuksenda mashkawiziwin, nibuksendam chiminotagazuin nongum oma. And Creator, the blessing that I give to all the women who are here, Creator, we thank them for their strength. Bless them with that wisdom and that knowledge to continue doing that good work and the protection as well. And Creator, together with one mind, one heart, one spirit, and one voice and one determination, we thank you and we acknowledge you for the love that you've given to each and every one of us, that great gift of love, Zagieduin. And thank you, Creator, for lifting up our women and for our voices to be heard, for our wisdoms to be acknowledged, for our strength to be the inspiration for our communities and for our families, and most importantly for the children. So I thank the Creator and my ancestors for hearing this prayer that was said and the blessing that was given, and I say thank you. And these words that I will share to each and every one of you here as we gather with this conference on economic abuse, I think about the lived experience of First Nations women. And I say this as a teaching, that it is important that First Nations women are part and parcel to the work that needs to be done relating to this economic abuse, because as First Nations women, we have suffered great economic abuses because of colonization and its institutions, its system and its laws, and how it has removed us from our place and power and our geopolitical structures and our affairs, our social and community affairs, our businesses and our economies, because we always had our economies well in place long before the colonizers and settlers came here. That was taken away from us through colonial laws, through those colonial institutions, and they continue to be here. Our women were removed from the right to our land, the right to our identity, and even the right to our children through this process of residential schools, through this process of genocide and assimilation, the genocide of our identity. It was more of a genocide of our identity. It was a genocide of our rights, a genocide of our culture, a genocide of who we are, our ways of knowing and our ways of being. And that is totally unacceptable. But more and more awareness is being made. We've been voicing this. We have been voicing this for so long, but now finally there are those out there that are listening. I think about my friend, the brilliant mind that she had, the late Patricia Montour, and how she spoke so well of all this, the impacts and the legacies of colonization, and how it has really impacted our First Nation women or our Indigenous women, to our families, to our land, to our children, to our social structures, our political structures, to our economies, to everything about who we are as those first peoples, of the first women of Turtle Island. So economic abuses, and we're finally, and we've, this reclamation of place and power in our identities and our citizenship and our geopolitical and our governance, because we were leaders. We were the leaders in our communities and in our nations. Nothing moved without the voice of women. Nothing moved without the direction of our women. Our women were so gifted. Our women were they held that power. And I don't mean the word power in a negative way, in the way some people think that it means, you're going to be, your power in the sense of you're going to be putting down others. No, It was that place and power in creation, stemming from creation, and the right to live upon Mother Earth with our roles and our responsibilities, with those great gifts of that knowledge that we came here with, that we pass that on to our sons and our daughters, and how we operated in our matriarchal, matrilineal, everything was matri. It was the women. And that was so beautiful and so powerful. And it was just a great gift that the Creator gave us. And that was taken from us. And the patriarchy replaced us. But we continue to hold on to our strength. We continue to raise our voices, and we will continue to do so. And it is important, and I thank you for providing that space for Indigenous women to voice our lived experiences, to share our wisdom, to share our knowledge, and those what we call best practices. How have we contributed to the economies, not only of our communities or of our nations, but the economies to Canada, to the United States, to international, because we have, and we will continue doing so. And that is so important. But we gotta come together in that, what I always say, in that medicine wheel, or that, because you're all in that medicine wheel. You're all in that knowledge in our creation. We come together in that circle to put our minds together, to put our strengths together, to put our wisdoms together, to provide for all women, that there can no longer be any more room for economic abuse, because the women must have their rightful place in all economies. And we will do this through our strengths, our wisdom, our lived experiences, and our voice, which is so powerful. Voice is powerful because we are the backbones of our communities, and we are the foundation of our nations. So Chimigwech, thank you for giving me this time to say these words. Ayangwamezin nichkiwe dug nigawa min kizagiin. There's no word for goodbye in our language. But what we do say is, until we see each other again, and we will see each other again, you take good care, and may the Creator bless you and all of your relations. Chimigwech, I love you, sisters. Miigwech.
Claudette, you have set the tone for this event. You have set the tone for our conversations for today and for every single day. We are so honored with that blessing and sharing with us what your community has gone through and what is going through. And yes, we are in this, all of us fighting together. And as I mentioned to you in our earlier conversations, I'm still learning, and I'm relearning as a settler of this nation. And I hope that we can continue these conversations and create a better future for everyone. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you have a very busy schedule. You just have that little university over there to do business with. So I appreciate you taking your time with us today. We will share the recording, and we will share this with you and your team. Thank you so much.
Well, if I may, thank you, Natalie, and if I may leave all of you with these words. We come together in that spirit of sisterhood. And the energy that I am receiving here, despite the fact we're not together in person, I could all feel your enthusiasm and your energies. And I say this in my language, that Mama we ikwe wag, Mama we pimose. The women, all of us, no matter where we come from, let us walk together. Miigwech, take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And with this incredible blessing, we move on to our next, another incredible woman, advocate, change maker. And this is the wonderful, and I'm so thrilled that Selena Cesar Chavanez has called has accepted our call to join us today as our keynote speaker. Many of you know her as a former member of Parliament with the Government of Canada from 2015 until 2019. During her time in office, she helped shape policy related to mental health, equity, and justice. And I am thrilled that you are joining us this morning. Thank you so much, Selena. I will pass it over to you. As you know, we have many attendees joining us, not only from Canada, but from around the world. So I'm sure they are really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, where you've come from, and where you are as of today. So I pass this over to you, Selena. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for having me. It is an honor to be here. Thank you, Claudette, for that very inspiring and inspirational, as always, Chimugwech to you, opening, setting the tone for this important conversation around economic abuse. I wonder if I could share my slides. I just want to make sure that that's able to happen. And I see that I can. Okay, great. So I just want to say thank you to you. I know that you may have to come in and out or run. So thank you, Claudette, for opening and grounding us in a position of truth. Because in order for us to get to reconciliation, we have to start with truth. Truth I always say, it doesn't matter how you receive the truth. The truth is truth, and we honor each other's truth. We honor you being here and your commitment or your call to action for us to remember our ancestors, to remember the people that have come before, to remember our solidarity in walking with you. Black and Indigenous people share very common histories in terms of losing our land, in terms of the genocide of colonialism, in terms of enslavement, in terms of losing our identities, from being removed from where we came, from the land in which we loved and lived and played, and given new identities because of colonialism. So I honor you, I honor our ancestors, our shared ancestors across Turtle Island, and the African ancestors that also line the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And so I will share my screen now. Let me see how I could do this. Okay, make sure. Share. And okay, so today I want to just briefly talk to you about the strategy of disruption. I know that advocacy work is painful work sometimes, and especially we do it because of the pain that we felt. In looking through some of the chat from people around the world, I see that there are people who are victims of economic abuse and are here in a place of advocacy because they want to ensure that what has happened to them never happens to anyone else. I often say that, you know, I advocate for example, the repeal of mandatory minimums. I advocate for, you know, pardons for people with cannabis possession now that it's legal. And I don't do that because I plan on going to jail. I don't advocate for those things because I plan on ending up in prison at some point. I advocate for them because I know the pain of being labeled by the worst thing that you've ever done. I advocate because that pain of loneliness and feeling that you're going to be left behind, I have felt that in my life. And so I want to honor those who have been victims and have used that pain to advocate, to respond, to challenge, to break glass ceilings, because when we challenge and bend the status quo, or we challenge and disrupt and break glass ceilings, we're going to get hurt even more, because those of us that are closest to the glass, when the glass falls, chances are if you're closest to it, you're going to get cut. And so I want to acknowledge you being here today and honor your presence and your voice and your commitment to change and commitment to justice and commitment to truth as we build this road to reconciliation. And as we do that, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my home here in Whitby, which is located on the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Williams Treaty First Nation of Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Georgian Island, Beausoleil, and Rama First Nations. And when I do a land acknowledgement, I want to make sure that we are doing that with a call to action. And I believe Claudette has set the groundwork for that call to action, to honor those that have come before us in the spirit of working forward towards ensuring that economic abuse of any kind to any person globally, and I see a lot of people from our global communities here, does not continue to happen. And so I want to acknowledge this beautiful land and the resilience of our Indigenous brothers, sisters, two-spirited people in ensuring that my family could live, work, and play here. And I'll continue to honor that, the land in which we occupy and in which we share. And so I want to give you just a little bit about me before I go into the conversation about disruption. And at the end of my book, Can You Hear Me Now? I say to the people of Canada and beyond, your value is not determined by your title, and your leadership does not require a title. The power has always belonged to the people. It is time for the people to realize their power. It is not enough to hear my voice. We need to hear you too. And these words are so powerful and remind me that, when people ask me to speak, they say, Selena, you're your voice for us. I'm nobody's voice. When Natalie asked me to be here today, it was to help amplify voices that are speaking, but are either pushed to the side because we do not have time for that conversation, or pushed to the side because you're challenging the way things have always been done, or their whispers, or their cries. And so in the ability to amplify those voices, I am here. So I'm here to learn with you. And, in talking to some of my former colleagues, both male and female, I understand the holistic definition of economic abuse. But I want to just give you a little bit of my story in the context, because leaving politics, you would think someone with a resume like mine, who had 10 years as an entrepreneur running neurological clinical trials, co-chairing Canada's first national epidemiology study on neurological conditions, being parliamentary secretary to a sitting prime minister, parliamentary secretary to international development, a member of parliament, that when I exited that job, it would be easy for someone like me to find a job. But I didn't work for a year. And to Claudette's earlier point, when we think about how the patriarchy, how racism, sexism, discrimination, ableism, homophobia, xenophobia impacts us, especially those with multiple intersecting identities, we really understand how economic abuse can have such a profound effect, not just on the person and the family, but on our communities and our countries. And if my title, my job, my academic scholarship, my business acumen, my political savviness, my title never protected me, what say someone else who is vulnerable, who doesn't have the voice, who doesn't have the capacity, who doesn't have the ability to influence and to change? What say her? What say them? And I share this with you because I want you to understand, to know that I might not understand fully your pain, but I don't have to empathize with your pain to be compassionate about your cause. And so my work throughout the government of Canada fit this particular mold of looking at the problem woman of color when you go into spaces, and this is part of the strategy of disruption. So for those of you who have been through a system or through a particular advocacy, you know that, when you go in, you try to fit in, you try to do the nice, pleasant things to try to, advocate for that change. You sit polite, you do the things that you're supposed to do. You start to make a mark because you think that people are listening. And this is how I was in Parliament. So it's no difference between me being in Parliament and you and anybody else working with their own systems to make change. So being in Parliament, I started to, really try to make a mark, as was said by Natalie, talking about my own mental health journey, talking about equity, talking about justice, and speaking up about racism and demanding equity. And the moment I started to do that, the moment I started to like ruffle some feathers, disrupt the status quo, what happened? That's when the challenges happened. That's when the glass started to fall from the ceiling and I started getting cut. That's when I got messages to say, figure yourself out. Why are you being so disruptive? Get on board. And that's when I knew it was time to leave. Not quit, which people tend to say about me. I quit. I don't quit. I made a choice to leave because I knew that for me, the passion I had around advocacy, around ensuring that certain causes were front and center, did not require me to be in Parliament. That passion didn't leave when I left. So I'm here with you today to share some of those lessons that I've learned. So how do we start to see the impact of the work that we're doing when, hey, Selena, you're making this really dreadful. I mean, you're in Parliament and you had to leave because, you couldn't disrupt enough in there. How are we supposed to do this? And the way that we do this is by doing it together. The way that we do that is by always knowing that even when we're standing alone on the right side of history, it is better to stand alone there than to stand with the crowd on the wrong side. So I'm here to take this journey with you and to say that even though I have to leave after this message, that I will be with you. I will walk with you in whatever part of this next strategy of disruption that you need me to be in. And so the strategy of disruption. So people say to me when I left politics, and I mean, a quick Google search will show you how fantastic that exit was. I don't have a clean mouth. I have a potty mouth. So if you are watching any videos with the sound up and on, I suggest you put headphones in, or if you don't like swearing, just don't watch it at all. But the strategy of disruption does involve having people who are like me, who are the ones that are going to call out, the ones that are going to not be afraid and be unapologetic about challenging those who are in positions of power. But that's not everybody. And so while some people don't like my style of disruption, it is not the only element of disruption that is required. If we start at the beginning, when we think about how change sometimes happens, it starts with a protest or some critical event that is a catalyst for change. Right now, what we have in terms of protest is a global pandemic. Right? So in the pandemic, we saw that gender-based violence was on the rise. We saw that persons, especially women and gender diverse folks, especially those of color with disabilities, different sexual orientation, religious minorities, those with multiple intersecting identities were being extremely negatively impacted by a pandemic. That is your catalyst. Now you think, how do you use your data, your personal stories to enact policy change? Well, I'll get to that in a little while, but you use all of the information that you have through your advocacy, through your agencies, through your collective efforts locally and globally to put together a package that says, hey, this pandemic has caused this impact. Here is what we'd like to see in terms of policy change. This is what we need. Now you get to the political level and you have to ask, well, is there political will to take what I have as information for policy change and change it? And when I say political will, I'm not just talking about talking to government. I'm talking about talking to opposition. I'm talking about staff. I'm talking about Prime Minister's office. I'm talking about chiefs of staff. I'm talking about everybody. Because if we're not talking to everybody about our issue, we are missing part of the boat. We are missing part of the strategy. Often people go to government and forget opposition because we don't really like opposition and they don't like us. That's not the point. The point is to leverage the fact that the opposition is sitting in opposition so that they could put pressure on the government for you to elevate your call for a policy change. And then the other thing is to not just talk to the politicians, because honey, we're only here for 4 years, maybe 8. Some of us sit longer than that. I didn't, it was a choice. But then to speak to the bureaucracy, because they are the ones that are there for the long term. Who are the people inside who are, quietly wanting this change? They're not the disruptors, they're not the protesters, but they're the ones on the inside who are doing the little work, the quiet work, the non-Selena loud work to actually make that change happen. How many times are we engaging with them? And then you have the people who are the ones that can have that increased social power. So the Selenas, hey, we want this done, it's not getting done. How can you help us? So when we think about that in order, the protesters, when we saw in 2020, Black Lives Matter completely explode. Yes, it was related to George Floyd, but there was already a movement that happened. There was a movement that happened years before 2020 that allowed for the explosion of the Black Lives Matter hashtag or the Black Lives Matter movement. I say hashtag because I don't know if people really are about action when it comes to that, but that movement that happened. And so that your work needs to be ones that are laying the groundwork so that when you see something like a pandemic or something that's going to happen after hit, you are ready to, and this sounds really bad, but capitalize on the momentum of that particular action. And I use the word capitalize not to have it affiliated with capitalism or a sort of a greedy nature, but to use that momentum to be able to further your cause. And what does that look like? That looks like, and often with organizations, there's no money, there's no resources, there's nothing, but you have power. And the power has always belonged to the people. That is why the opening slide was what it was. The power always belongs to your people, irrespective of title, irrespective of influence. So you use social media, you use emails, you use grassroots organizing, you connect internationally, which is the power that we have right now. There's so many people international. We use letter writing, we use protests where necessary, and we use advocacy. There's nothing that we do not use when it comes to our ability to create change. You leave no stone unturned in that regard. And in that regard, I skipped over where I showed sort of what you input into policy, in policy change, the ROI, which is often what people forget. What is the return on investment? And again, I know I sound completely capitalistic, and that is a horrible thing. But I have 2 MBAs. I have an MBA in healthcare management and an executive MBA. And when I think about things, I think about it in terms of what is that return on investment? When people came into my office as a member of parliament, they would send, dear Selena, here's the importance of my issue. We know the importance of economic abuse. Here's the proposed solution. Here is how the proposed solution helps me fulfill my mandate. Here's how the proposed solution helps the minister fill the objectives of their mandate letter. And what tends to be missing in this conversation is the last point, the return on investment. Selena, as a government, and I know many people out there are thinking, I shouldn't have to do this. I know we should not have to do this. People should be driven by altruistic purposes, or objectives, but oftentimes they are not. So we need to give them, we need to spoon feed them the answers that they don't know that they need. And so what does that look like when we talk about return on investment? Well, economic abuse costs, not just women, not just women. When we look about reports on women in globally, you give a woman $1, they return 90% of that back to their communities. So it's not just women that are impacted and their families, it's communities, it's countries. So when we think about economic abuse in its totality, why would I be interested as a government in investing or concentrating in economic abuse is because I know the cost and I know the impact that it will have, not just right now on that individual, family, or community, but for the entire lifespan. That's sometimes what I don't think people understand. It's the entire lifespan of that individual. And it's not just economics in the way that people think about economics. You have to force them to think about it differently, because they don't automatically think of the health implications. They don't automatically think of the justice implications. They don't automatically think about the education implications of that person and their children. They don't all automatically think of the social determinants of health where it comes to housing and other structures that support that person. Unfortunately, that's not how they think. And so in this road to advocacy, we need to be thinking more outside of the box, thinking about what people are not thinking about. Don't take a single thing for granted. So the last part is those influencers, is those ambassadors. Who are your ambassadors? Who are your influencers? Who are the ones that you go to and you knock on their door and you say, look, we tried to get this policy change. It went to the MPs, it went to the ministers, it went to the opposition. We wrote the letters, we did the social media, we did all this stuff, and nothing is happening. And then you bring in the influencers who are able to then elevate that voice, to able to fuel the fire that causes that grassroots movement to happen. Look at a couple of weeks, like last week in Ontario. You have a government that puts forward a bill, whether you like it or not. I just want you to watch the strategy unfold. Government puts forward a bill, people don't like it. Everybody, especially people who have power and influence, decided that they were going to say, oh, not today. And there was automatically back to the table to pull back the bill and have a negotiation. So you have to have everybody in that strategy of disruption ready to go and ready to work. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions, Natalie, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say how incredibly powerful and inspiring your message is. And I think I could listen to you speak all day, right? So we just have, the 30 minutes, but certainly appreciate you taking the time today to speak to us and to talk about your journey and that thought process of what it took to get you here today. So we appreciate that so much. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, we do have a couple of minutes. We are moderating the Q&A forum. If you want to pop some questions in there, I'll wait. If anyone wants to.
We have a hand up from Leah.
Oh, Leah, yes. Your question is, I'm just going to unmute you. Do you want to speak? There you go, Leah. I think I unmuted you.
Oh, you can just she's still muted, or does she want to type the question in?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for, putting together this summit and sharing your insights. Very inspiring. I wanted to ask if you believe that in some ways throughout time that women have been kept in some ways deliberately impoverished because it kind of, as you were talking about, made more economic sense to keep us in that way. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because sometimes I think that it's almost been deliberately designed for some reason to
Yeah.
keep us impoverished.
So Leah, what I didn't say during my during my talk was that the system is working as it's designed. It's not broken. It's working actually as it should, right?
Thank you.
And so
the
question we need to ask ourselves then in this fight to dismantle the patriarchy are, do we actually have capacity to dismantle it, or do we want to be the tools? Or do we want to do what Bell Hooks said in her book, Yearning, which is a beautiful work of art, chapter 15. Do we want to operate from the beauty of the margins? Just create our own. We keep going to and knocking on these doors and expecting for some crazy reason that the system is going to say, oh, hello, we didn't know you were there. Oh my God, come in. Yes, please dismantle what has kept us in power for so long. Please, we expect that. That's insane. It's like actually crazy. And so Bell Hooks speaks about the beauty, the creativity, the openness of the margins, and the ability for us to say, okay, there are different funding sources. Look what happened with, oh my God, names escape me, but the guy's wife, Bezos's wife, after they got divorced, decided that she was going to invest billions, millions, I don't know if it's billions, but a lot of money, let's just say, into historically Black colleges and universities. It wasn't government. It was private. So let's figure out what those margins are, what the beauty of those margins are, because we keep knocking on the doors of an institution that has been designed. It wasn't even designed for us. Honey, when those institutions were made, we weren't even persons, let's be clear. And for me, in one part of my identity or another, I was either 3/5 of a person or not a person at all. So either way, it wasn't designed for me. So let's think about things differently. We are now coming out of a pandemic, or maybe going back into one. I have no idea what the hell's going on. But whatever's happening now, we have a great opportunity to think, never mind outside of the box, throw the damn box away. What is happening in other jurisdictions? How do we work well together? What can we do to decide that this is the issue that we want to eradicate, like any other thing that we want to, and how do we do it? And using the same structures might not be the answer. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Selena. So absolutely, I think you nailed it there, is that the system isn't broken, but it was just designed this way. And then we have to think about who designed these systems, right? So we could, dissect that. And I think it doesn't take very long to see where those systems, by whom they were created. We have another question here. I think we have time for one more. Is that okay with you, Selena?
Totally, yes, yeah.
So where do you think, and this comes from Suzanne, where do you think the thin line lies between engaging your audience or switching them off when campaigning for change?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. That is a ultra thin line, Suzanne. And, people are passionate about their issues. They're passionate. They're passionate because it comes from a sense of pain or hurt or a deep love, right? And yeah, sometimes people who are on the other side of that might not see it, might not see, why is Selena always talking about race? Does she see racism everywhere? I mean, why does she is there nothing else that exists in her world? And so how do you dance that line? but stay true to yourself. And I think at the end of the day, Suzanne, we have to stay true to ourselves. And we have to engage in a way that allows everybody to play and have a role in that engagement. So that's why I don't just call it disruption. It's a strategy of disruption. So so there's ebbs and flows. So the protest doesn't last forever, because that would just get on people's nerves. So the protest lasts, and then you should have some kind of idea of, okay, now we're gonna ebb, and we're going to now allow the political will, the bureaucracy to work itself out. And then we're going to go back up and we're going to flow, because now the issue is kind of fizzling out, and we want to re-engage people. We want to reignite them. But how do you reignite them using the same story? You find different stories. You find different creative ways of doing that flow. And then you have to ebb again, and then you have to flow. So you saw that arrow started off really narrow, but it was going forward and it was getting thicker, right? So that ebb and flow you have to be really cognizant of that. And you really have to be the one way to test yourself is whether you're burning yourself out in the whole process, right? So if you're the protester and you are burning yourself out, maybe it's time to just pull back and let the ebb happen so somebody else could take the work. I don't know if that answered the question, but it's tough. That's a tough one.
Oh, Suzanne says, wonderful response.
Oh, okay.
I think you did. I mean, I think you also say it very clearly that we have to save ourselves so that we can have the energy to fight, to activate, to advocate, right? So I think that is an important message for so many of us that are in this space.
And remember that only you could burn yourself out.
Yeah.
The work doesn't burn you out. You do.
It really does. Well, to close this off, I do have, I think out of, your presentation, I mean, I'm walking away and my heart is just, part of my heart hurts. The other part is ignited. But one word I think that came out of your presentation, it seems like a simple word, but I think one that is in our language, especially politically, is the word choice. When that choice is taken away from us, whether it's for mental health, financial, economic, obviously employment, and the list can go on. I think that is what you're also talking about, that lifelong impact. Yeah. And I think choice is the underlying here. So thank you, Selena.
Can I just before I go, just answer Kim's question about how does the average person find the time? It's about the passion. It's about the passion. It's not about the time, because nobody has time. There is no time. There's only now. There's no time. There's no past. There's no future. There's now, and then now, and then now. That's it. So there's no time. If you don't love the present, if you're not passionate about what you're doing in the now, time cannot help that. You're prioritizing your kids, your jobs, your family, your chores, your whatever. But that's why there's not words like retirement and like the ikigai, dharma, those kinds of things. What you're passionate about, this work around advocacy and equity and justice is not a job for me. I love it. So when you call me, I'm passionate about it. So I prioritize it. I want to make sure my slides are great. I want to make sure that, I have all of those things, and doing a PhD and figuring out what I'm going to do with my work and doing this and doing that. We all have a lot of stuff to do. But when it comes to that passion, even if you're putting 6 minutes into something and you're putting 110% of your passion into it and your love, that's how you find the time, because you make the most of the now.
Thank you. Thank you for those closing remarks, Selena. I think all of us are walking away, again, inspired by your talk today. I know many of our participants are reaching out to buy your book, and I say reaching out at a bookstore or virtual, wherever you find your book. I know I read it a few years ago, and I go back to it. often, to get those moments of inspiration and just to remind myself where we're at. So thank you so much again for answering the call to support our first ever summit. We hope to see you again in this space. And I hope that you can stay. I know you're a busy woman as well, aren't we all? And if you can't, you'll get the recording as well. So thank you again, Selena.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Bye, thank you. So with that, I think many of you can say that we are all here listening and we're taking away a lot of our emotions. And so thank you to Selena. And if you do have a moment, go and find her book, whether you can do it on audio or not. It's a great read. Before we jump into our panel conversation led by Dr. Natalie Snow, as I mentioned earlier this morning, our summit is possible because of the support of Women and Gender Equality Canada. And we have a special message. I'm hoping the audio, we just received it, so I'm hoping the audio works well. We have a special message from Jenna Sutz, who's the Canadian Parliamentary Secretary. And I say Canadian Parliamentary Secretary because we have many international folks with us today. So she is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women, Gender Equality and Youth. So she has a few welcome words. And I do want to say, si vous avez des questions à poser en français, on peut les poser en français et nous allons faire des traductions pour qu'on puisse avoir des conversations aussi en français. So I just wanted to make sure that we are also taking questions in French. So without further ado, we'll play Jenna Suds' Welcome.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Jenna Suds, and I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from my office in Ottawa on the ancestral land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to connect with you from the various territories and communities you are in today. Thank you for being here today to kick off the first ever Economic Abuse Conference in Canada. I am thrilled to have all of you here to help raise awareness about this important issue. This is a timely topic, given that we are currently in Financial Literacy Month, and on the 25th, we begin the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, starting on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Gender-based violence continues to be a systematic problem across Canada, one that takes a physical, psychological, and financial toll on survivors, witnesses, children, and the economy. As Parliamentary Secretary, part of my mandate is to advance the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence and to understand the root causes. Economic abuse is a form of gender-based violence that is often underreported and underestimated. It affects women of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life. It's often difficult to identify and even harder to escape. In many cases, it is used to control and manipulate victims and can leave them feeling isolated, trapped, and helpless. This has only been magnified by the COVID-19 pandemic, with 80% of women surveyed experiencing more controlling and manipulative behavior from their current or ex-partner. Faced with this increase in abuse, combined with the financial stress caused by the pandemic, it is necessary now more than ever to spread awareness on the challenges and barriers for economic abuse survivors and victims. As a government, this has been a priority for us. Since 2015, we've invested over $130 million to support 256 projects aimed at empowering women's economic participation. Just last week, alongside provincial and territorial governments, Minister Ian announced the historic endorsement for the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence, a 10-year commitment to work together towards a Canada free of gender-based violence, a Canada that supports victims, survivors, and their families. Collectively and independently, governments are working to support the essential work of organizations that are saving lives on the front lines as we speak. Since April 2020, the federal government has invested over $240 million of emergency COVID-19 funding in 1,400 women's shelters, sexual assault centers, and other organizations, including nearly 140 organizations that serve Indigenous individuals. Because of this funding, more than 1.3 million people experiencing gender-based violence had a safe place to turn to and access critical supports and services. But there's still much work to be done. I'd like to thank the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment for their leadership on this issue and facilitating this national collaboration to address this pressing issue. To the panelists, survivors, and experts participating, thank you for your work. By sharing advice and real-life experiences, you are empowering others and making a huge difference. To everyone here today, I hope you can listen, learn, and reflect on some of the important topics being discussed, and think about how you can integrate some of these practices into your everyday lives as well. This is a space for networking and an opportunity to learn from each other, share collective knowledge and expertise, and build a more just and equitable society for everyone. I wish you all a productive conference, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting to hear about your progress.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to take my camera off. So thank you so much to the Office of Jenna Suds for sending her welcome to us. I now head over to Dr. Natalie Snow. Hello, Dr. Snow.
Hello, hello.
So her panel, I will let her introduce her panelists and talk about what her discussion will be on this afternoon. We will be taking questions again in the question and answer chat forum. It's just easier for us to monitor all of our questions. And then after Natalie's session, we will stop the recording so then we can then move on to the 2 o'clock recording, because we do want to separate our recordings, because the 1 o'clock fireside chat is not being recorded. Okay, just as a reminder. So Dr. Snow, welcome. Thank you for being part of the summit. We're thrilled. I know that you have a busy day ahead, as you're also in a later summit discussion, a panel discussion at 3 o'clock. So your panel discussion will be focusing on the experiences from social services and when serving economic abuse victims, what barriers or challenges or successes they're faced with. So without further ado, I pass it over to you, Dr. Snow, and I'll let the panelists also introduce themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. Bonjour, welcome. Welcome to our social services panel. As Natalie said, my name is Dr. Natalie Snow, Natalie squared here, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. I want to start by the title of the panel is Introduction to the Context of Domestic Economic Abuse. So we're going to explore how economic abuse impacts different social service sectors, and it is going to be an interesting and thoughtful discussion. We've brought together social service providers from different social service sectors from different parts of the country, which I think what it's going to represent, or what it's going to show, is it's so different, yet somewhat connected with themes of economic abuse and the patterns of behavior, but how it is manifests and is operationalized across the country. So due to timing, I'm not going to read the full bios, but I am going to introduce all of our panelists. So if you could also turn on your cameras, sorry, your computers are on. But I would like to, first of all, welcome our four panelists here out of 5. First is Dana Warren. She is from the St. John's Women's Center, based out of Newfoundland, Ontario. Newfoundland. My apologies, it's not in Ontario. Then we are moving across the country, and we have Ray Escreet. She is the executive director of the Harmony House, and that's based out of Ottawa. Moving across, we have Amy Monroe from Suggest, which is based out of Alberta, Calgary, I believe. And then we have the West Coast covered with Samantha Davis from Rise Women's Legal Center. So I'd like to welcome and thank you everybody for coming in. Oh, and Kelsey is here. She's just trying to get her camera on. So we also have Kelsey Owen, who is from Jillian's Place, which is a shelter here in Ontario as well. So let's just get started. Our first question is to Samantha and Dana. Within your organization, how do you see the relationship between coercive control and economic abuse? And I should have said this before, but if any other panelists would like to provide some response to the questions, please feel free to jump in as well. So for Dana and Samantha.
Since I'm on the East Coast, I think I'll just jump in, and maybe I've done some thinking about this question, and I've also done some talking to other colleagues. I work as a counselor here at the Women's Center, and I guess the statement, money makes the world go round, actually covers so much, because money impacts every part of our lives at a micro, meso, and macro level. So when we think about that question, it impacts housing, it impacts food security, our credit ratings, our mental and physical health. Like I've heard women talk about, women and non-binary people we work with, you know, your medication doesn't get bought this month because the money is no longer there, and there's nothing you can say about it because there's other backlash in other ways. But I think a lot of people know how money impacts the lives of people who experience abuse. The one that I'd like to bring up just to highlight is actually the justice system. So what we see a lot of is like continuous litigation that empties the bank accounts of folks, and also demoralizes people. No one can afford the better lawyer or the better system. And we also see court systems that actually order counseling for children, for example. And that burden often sits with the person who might be taking the other person to court or looking for that. So that continuous door that happens, where we see wealthier partners, ex-partners, keep people oppressed with the use of money. And I didn't even mention the wage gap. So we know women are spending time at home. They have a lack of access to education, to work experience, to building resumes, to having credentials in order to find housing or get jobs. Like you need to give me a half an hour on this topic is how this needs to go, because yeah, money makes the world go around kind of covers it for me. And I guess add multiple intersecting identities and oppressions in that intersectional lens, and yeah, I'll let my counterpart say a little bit more about it, but that's my opening.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I kind of wanted to say about this is that economic abuse is often something that is so covert and more challenging to see, especially because of things like societal gender roles, specifically in terms of finances. And often economic abuse can overlap with things that we might not see as being abusive in a lot of ways. So it can be difficult to identify what is and what isn't abuse sometimes, especially for people who don't have a family violence analysis or don't really understand the intricacies and the complexities of abuse. It's often a really clever strategy to isolate the people that we work alongside. Often perpetrators of violence will convince their victim that financial abuse is a logical and reasonable thing. oh, this is something that needs to be done for the family home or for our finances, without being able to kind of hide behind that, that financial knowledge that somebody might not necessarily have. And specifically in heteronormative relationships, it's really common for example, the man to be maybe the higher earner or in control of the finances, which can sometimes give cover to abusive dynamics and might make it seem less serious. Some instances where economic abuse can really be challenging is that it doesn't necessarily happen in isolation and is often something that happens as a pattern. And for somebody who might not be able to identify patterns, specifically in our legal system, which is not good at identifying patterns. I guess I should have mentioned that I'm a legal advocate. So I work with women, gender diverse and non-binary folks leaving violence. And I generally help with things that lawyers tend to help with, but for clients who can't afford a lawyer or who aren't eligible for legal aid. Yeah, so helping people navigate and figure out these patterns and helping lawyers and judges identify those patterns where they might not otherwise see them, because economic abuse is not something that's often talked about. And there's really quickly another point I wanted to make too, is that often people who are experiencing violence have really clever ways of managing behavior, which can then make abuse look less serious over time. So for someone who's maybe coming in to help somebody who's been in a 10-year relationship, by the end of it, that client has probably been doing so much to manage the abuse that it's not as obvious by the end. And then just a couple really quick examples that I've seen with clients firsthand. I've had exes or perpetrators of violence put automatic withdrawals on clients' bank accounts when their paychecks get deposited, lying or underreporting their income regarding self-employment or otherwise, so they can avoid paying child support and spousal support, preventing women from working or telling them that if they do go to work, all the money from their job would just go towards childcare and they wouldn't have anything left for themselves, saying they have to live in a small community because it's all they can afford, and then isolating them from their friends and family. And then just one other bit I've had, which is really common, is often men saying that they will file for bankruptcy and would prefer that both of them have nothing than to give their ex anything. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the manipulation continues, the coerciveness continues even after the separation. And you brought up the justice system, and I saw a number of comments about the justice system, and that's primarily where my research lies, is within the justice system. And we just can see how harmful in family court, criminal court, civil court, that it is, that the system is not well serving for most women and women identifying. Is there anybody else who wanted to add to that? If not, I'll really good points being brought up, and things to consider when we're talking about ways that we see economic abuse happening within our communities. Also, okay, so the next question is for Kelsey, Amy, and Ray. How does your organization support economic abuse survivors? We can start with Amy, alphabetical.
Sure. Thanks, Natalie. So just to kind of preface this, I'm coming again from Alberta. So I have the Alberta context in which our province has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the country. And I think for us, what I really want to outline is that we really work from the coercive control lens. And so understanding that domestic abuse, domestic violence is a pattern, any pattern of behaviors in which the person is trying to strip the freedom, strip away the sense of identity of another person, and that can happen in a lot of different ways. And the reason why we talk about coercive control as a lens is because abuse tactics don't just happen in isolation. A person doesn't just experience economic abuse. They don't just experience emotional abuse. right? There are a lot of nuance and complexity to that. And so we tend to take an approach. So our specifically when it comes to our intervention programs, we provide peer support programs across the province to talk about experiences of coercive control and abuse and what that looks like. And so a lot of the time, the folks who are accessing our services have many different experiences of abuse, right? Some of that is specifically economic, some of that might be other patterns of behavior that they have been or that have been perpetrated against them. And so for us, the main reason how we support individuals is through our peer support programs, where we really just allow a space to talk about what does coercive control look like, what are some of the nuances and complexities that people see, how do we understand and recognize everybody's experience and journey is very different, and that there is a place for all of that there.
The peer support has been, I've been reading a lot more about that, and it seems to be such a positive experience for so many survivors, and it's so beneficial. And something we need to really.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we see peer support, right? I think we see that a lot in the mental health field, and we don't see it very often in the domestic violence field. And a lot of the time, there's so much power in being able to sit with other people who don't necessarily have the same experiences as you, but to be able to say, I know what it feels like to feel those, to be in that place. And so there's a lot of power that comes from that for sure.
Yeah. Empower, re-engaging and re-empowering survivors. That's great. Those are great programs. Kelsey, did you want to add to that?
So our programs are a little different. We Jillian's Place is in Ontario. We are a safety shelter. So I am a counselor in the shelter. So I deal with mostly shelter clients. I'm working with clients right after they leave a domestic violence relationship. So we're trying to get like the simple things like getting onto Ontario Works or trying to figure out if they can get any income source whatsoever after having no income source probably for a while. If they want to help like applying for jobs and like that empowering of like being able to get a job or being able to go back to school. And like figuring out what options there are for them or like helping them budget, because a lot of times they've never had money management because it's been controlled for however long, right? So helping them with like the base things first so that we can empower them to find housing and find like to be able to manage going forward, I think is
such an important time too, is we know the most dangerous time for leaving physical violence is when the partner is leaving. So it's such an important work, and to just meet those basic needs that it can be very overwhelming, right? When you're just leaving and the trauma that you've experienced and you've had to leave your home. So great, thank you for sharing that, Kelsey. Ray, would you like to add?
Sure. So I'm the executive director of Harmony House, and we are Ottawa's second stage shelter. So after a family leaves the crisis shelter, similar to Jillian's Place, they would come live at our house, and they get their own apartment unit and they get to practice living independently, sometimes for the very first time in their life. So we kind of have to meet them where they're at. We've had women here who have never seen money before. They're immigrants, they're new to the country. And we actually had a woman who had never actually seen physical money. She always had servants do the shopping. So we had to teach her, this is a nickel, this is a quarter, we're gonna go to the quick stop and we're gonna buy something. And she was overwhelmed. She'd never been in a store. And that was heartbreaking to see, but by the time she left, she was able to do her own shopping. We've also partnered with banks. Scotiabank has just put out the new, it's designed for survivors of human trafficking, but they're expanding it now to survivors of domestic and intimate partner violence, where they can have a zero cost checking account. They can have a credit card. I mean, it's not a great, it's still 20% interest and totally unreasonable of a bank to be profiting off of people, but we did it anyway because capitalism.
Sorry.
And not a capitalism fan. But so there are those types of institutions, and then we've also actually like helped women clear their credit history, and we work with a wonderful man who used to be a banker, and he'll go through every single contract and find the flaws in the contracts that women have been forced to sign and say this is invalid and you can't hold her to this, and take a long walk. And it's really empowering to see these women like come in trembling with all of their papers that they've saved so carefully over years and say like, this is what he forced me to sign. This is the remortgage of the house. This was the loans that I had to sign off on. These are all the things he forced. And then the lovely man, Richard, will come in, and I've never met a banker I like, but I like Richard. And he comes in and he's like, oh yeah, look, they didn't even sign it. It's garbage. Get rid of it. And he goes into these meetings with the banks and advocates for women to be let out of these false debts. So we're trying hard to both teach, and like we also have budgeting programs and saving programs and things like that. But I think the real stick to the banks moment is when Richard walks through the door, or when I walk through the door and I'm like, no, we're having a meeting. Like this is not continuing. And sometimes you got to put on your big mama bear pants and go in, and you fight for the women that you're standing with.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty powerful. I'm Richard from Project Recover.
Yes.
Yeah. That is an awesome role that he's taken on, and the advocacy that he does, because I think if we could have Richards across the country helping support
just like
survivors
him over and over and over again. There should
across
be one
the country.
in every office.
But I like something that you really brought up with is meeting people at where they're at. And I think that is an important message to relay, and I'm sure with all the service providers we have in this room, and from my own experience working for Frontline, is not every client is different, and every client, it needs to be met where they're at, right? And we can't push somebody to where they're to move faster than they need to, or they can at the time, but is still taking that empowerment lens where we're trying to support, but meeting people where we're at, which is so important. Yeah,
thanks. One thing that drives me nuts about economic stuff is that people often say, well, we just need jobs. We don't need jobs. There are enough jobs. I have people who live in my shelter with 3-4 jobs, still not enough money. Jobs are not the issue, right? Income equality, equity, access to resources is the issue. My Nana, she raised 10 children. She's done her job. She doesn't need a job to get her out of poverty. The women that I work with who are in wheelchairs or have such brain damage from the amount of hits they've taken to the head are never going to work. Jobs are not a blanket solution. Sorry, I went off the rails.
No, that's good. Yes, I think you brought up some good points, and it isn't just that one like quick solution. Oh, well, everybody needs a job. We have to talk about the trauma. We have to talk about equity. We have to talk about like the whole round of the whole.
Bring in basic income already.
That's it.
Do it.
Dana, you wanted to add to that? Yeah.
I actually wanted to say we're already doing the work, but it's unrecognized in society. We're not being paid for raising up and raising others, and women embody this over responsibility of care. And that's why we need to have a basic income. So what was it, Ray? You already said everything I was thinking. Thank you.
All right. Yep. Basic income is a huge and I think very valid issue that we should across this country. I know be talking about. I know here in Ontario, before the Ford government, the Conservatives came in, we had a pilot program, and it was seeing success after success. I think it was based out of Hamilton, and Ford cut it when he came into power. When he came into Queen's Park, but the positive, like the positives far outweigh any sort of negative or even ill, I want to say ill-advised, but
it depends on the class you're in. Because if you are of the working class, it was a fantastic success. If you're of the owning class, not so much, because if people aren't desperate for food, for shelter, for income, they no longer are so subservient. They're no longer easy to manipulate and distract. So as soon as basic income comes in, it frees up all of the talent of your nation. And we can't have that because that's not profitable.
There you go. Yes. The yes, I'm not
sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I feel like, yes, the pains of or pain, not pains, it's not even the right word, but the ideas of capitalism, right? And this, you're right, with the power and control over.
It works as designed.
Yes. Yeah. Just the capitalism sucks. Yes. All right. So is there anybody else you'd like to add to talk about on this topic?
I guess I could add super quickly. I don't want to take up too much space, but at our organization, Rise Women's Legal Center, one of the main things that we can do to support survivors of economic abuse is help clients with gaining back power and control over their lives, in the sense of helping them get enforceable court orders for things like spousal support and child support, both interim and final orders. And then something called interim distribution of property, which is something we have in BC. I'm not sure what the laws are like across the country, but where people can have a portion of their equity in their property distributed to them before the final separation of assets happens, so that they can use that money to pay for a lawyer or other costs that are deemed necessary or justifiable by the court. And signing up for our BC Family Maintenance Enforcement Program. I believe there's programs similar to it across the country as well. But it's a program that helps ensure that clients are receiving their support payments from their ex.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to add, like, financial abuse is tied to all the other forms of abuse.
Yeah.
So to say, like, we can't end financial abuse without ending abuse. And the way to end abuse is to make sure that you're not in it. So to solve this, you have to be able to leave. You have to have confidence that there's somewhere to go. There has to be housing. There has to be medical care. There has to be childcare. Like, all of those supports have to come into play. And it's all those things that have been cut and taken away in a systematic way since women became persons. The government has attacked them relentlessly since the 70s.
And so I find it's only getting worse too.
Good.
All really good tools and programs and statements that really just demonstrate the challenges and the difficulties in this sector. I want to be mentioned about pay, and I think that's pay for support workers or social services staff. I think that is something that I know a lot of us want to focus on the victims and or survivors and how we can better support them, because that's where our passion lies, like similar to what Selena was saying. But the reality is these many of these positions are paid well below a living wage, and that how can we sustain that? So that was also designed, I guess, in a way, that was designed to keep women in a certain level of a position of power, right? Low, because women are generally the ones working in these positions. Women are generally the ones also taking care of your family. Women are, and then where is the ability to move or to better, I guess, your financial situation, right? But they purposely don't pay and don't provide. And even when we talk about funding arrangements and so on, we see that a lot of times, wages aren't included. This isn't included because, they're maintained at a certain lower level, or an inability to then support your own family.
If I can just add a small comment, which is sort of tangentially related to what you're saying, I think also that we really have to be able to investigate some of the systems and supports that we have. So here's the reality of the situation, right? We have been working in the domestic violence field for decades, and domestic violence is not going down. Economic abuse is not going down, which means we're not doing something right? At the end of the day, there's something happening that is not allowing us to actually make the changes that we're looking to make. And so I think we really have to be able to investigate what are the innovative new ways of doing this work? What are the innovative and new ways of pushing and really starting to gain some traction within the federal government, wherever it needs to go, right? To be able to say, this system actually, the way that we have been doing supports and services traditionally is not working, right? And so what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah.
I will challenge you, Amy, on that one.
Please.
Do not go to new ways of doing things, but perhaps returning to old ways of doing things.
Sure,
because the grandmothers of Turtle Island had no such issues. And people will tell you, we have to work in the system we've got. Bull. We made this system, we can unmake it.
We can disentangle it.
And survivors of this system, but there were systems before. There was no homelessness on Turtle Island until my folks got here. There was the economies were not based around capitalism, capital, until well after my folks got here. So there are systems in place that work, that are not capital based, and we can bring them back. The whole thing is invented. Let's reinvent. Screw this system. It's a garbage system. Let's bring back the old way of doing things on Turtle Island. There is enough for everyone.
I love that. That really deconstructing the systems that we have put in place to say we actually had all the answers before this. Love that. Thank you.
And I mean, credit scores only came in in 1989. I was alive. In the 80s. My mother couldn't get a credit card when she got married. I didn't have a credit score when I was born, but I've got one now.
I'm older than credit scores.
We don't need.
It is very much a socially constructed system that is doing its mission. But I like the points you brought up with Turtle Island and before settlers and the colonization, the ongoing colonization. But
we've forgotten so much because it was erased from our schooling. But we are grown and we can school ourselves now, and we can look at our own histories and say, there's another way. And it doesn't have to be Turtle Island. There are other ways all around the world of economies set up that aren't based on capital, that don't have credit scores. So why are we saddling ourselves with this crap?
That's right. I think, and this really brings to my next question, which I think is going to have to be our last because of timing, but I think we've been having great conversations through this whole thing. And I guess I'll just pose it to everybody, is to, in a world without funding agreements, eligibility criteria, what would be a solution? And Ray's mentioned it with going back to our traditional Turtle Island worldviews and knowledge, but what would be a solution that would best support women or women identifying in stopping abuse?
I actually think that if we all felt and took a responsibility for misogyny in community and made it everyone's problem, which it has never been. Here we are. How many of us are on a call who are women who've been dealing and working in this work forever? I think, as Amy said earlier, this is the game. We have been doing the same thing for decades, and here we are not seeing that change. I know that behind closed doors, women's centers, women's organizations, LGBTQ plus IA organizations, Aboriginal women, those marginalized groups, we spent all of our time getting hooked by those micro systems that say, here's how you're funded. I have desperately considered, how do we take a macro look at this issue and make it our problem as communities, as families, as systems, as society? And I know it's not easy, but this other way of doing it behind closed doors is choking most of us and burning most of us out, I think. Our guest speaker talked about if you have passion and you have now, I respectfully disagree with that, because passion doesn't take care of the bottom of our scale, which is food, shelter, clothing. A lot of us, a lot of you guys work for next to nothing. And we walk in and out of this depending on the energy that we have. So yeah, if we could have a community that said, oh shit, we all did this. Let's all make this better. It'd be, that doesn't include money. Thanks.
Yeah.
A big piece for me with this, and it's really specific to the work that I do in the legal system in BC. I mean, the first thing would be eradicating things like rape culture, misogyny, patriarchy, so on. But that's a lofty goal for right now. So one thing that we talk a lot about at RISE is changing the child support system. And it's exactly what Dana was saying about, you can't deal with leaving violence, you can't find housing, you can't do all of these things until you have the basic ability to purchase food and to find a place to live and like do all these things. And right now in BC, the onus is on the person who has left violence generally to apply for child support. There are countries around the world where the government deals with it and nobody, like, you don't have to put in an application for child support. It just gets garnished off of the ex's income, for example. So for me, a big thing would be to take the onus off the survivor, to make claims, go to court, application after application, have to put in financial statements once a year, continually deal with their abuser in order to literally get something that is the right of the child and is meant to help support children in accessing their basic needs.
Yeah, if I can just add on to what Samantha is saying, kind of specifically towards economic abuse or just abuse in general. I think that we have a real gap in how we have to make the victim prove that they're experiencing violence, right? When it comes to anything court system related. And so for us, a big goal at our organization is to work towards legislating coercive control and actually broaden and help bring in those complexities and nuances of domestic abuse of coercive control in a way that is not making the victim have to essentially prove with evidence that they are experiencing violence and that they then need access to these things like security, safety, right? All of these basic needs that become entangled in this huge web. Right. And so for us, we really are working and trying to put pressure to bring coercive control to the federal government to legislate it, to start to broaden how we understand and how that's actually legislated, to kind of give us a better way of talking about abuse and how to eradicate it.
A really key point of that too is that ensuring that everyone is educated and trained and has like a fulsome understanding of what family violence is. It's not mandatory for judges and lawyers to receive family violence training in BC at all. And so I would say a huge thing would be for judges and lawyers, law students at the very basis of the whole thing is to learn about family violence in their family law courses and make family law courses mandatory if people are going to become judges one day, so we don't have a civil lawyer or a criminal lawyer sitting there making decisions about women and children's lives when they have no background in what they're talking about. They probably haven't even read or studied or anything the Family Law Act to understand what's going on. And so things like making it part of law school, including family violence training and continued professional development, and ensuring that people actually understand the nuances of violence, and that things often, like all the way down to what I was talking about before, that like people manage people's behavior to keep themselves safe. Women's safety plan every day in really unique and brilliant ways. And if you can't see that, then you're going to think that there's no violence or that the violence isn't that bad when people are completely manipulating how they live their lives, the times they take their kids out to go to the playground instead of being at home. Or I'll just put one last thing in that I wanted to mention before. Women so often walk away from massive property settlements because they just want to be done with their abusive ex. And if people are not able to catch that and see that she could be entitled to millions of dollars, especially in the Vancouver context, because of property, and they're just walking away from that because it's just too much to deal with the abusive process in court, the manipulative texts, the following them outside, the tracking their cars, removing their license plates from their cars, all these things that people do to just walk away from it and then leave them impoverished because they are now not able to buy property in Vancouver, for example.
I think we romanticize that idea too of, well, I just walked away from it. It's like, I'm so glad you said that, Samantha, because we see that so much where you're just so exhausted by the daily abuse post everything. And then it's being perpetuated by court systems that people are just, they walk away what is rightfully theirs. And the world says, you go girl, you did the right thing. You just left that shit behind. And it's so frustrating.
So problematic. Yeah.
So
I feel like that also happens with child support. Like people are just, otherwise I'm dealing with him or them all the time, right? Like, and it's not worth it. Like, I'd rather just live a semi-peaceful life than even have to ask for money for him.
And you shouldn't have to ask because it's the right of the child. The money should just end up in your account.
Yeah, for sure.
Shouldn't have to prove.
A lot of the injustice system is that you only have the rights that you have the money to defend.
Yeah.
We have the right. We have the right to housing in this country. You tell that to all the homeless folks out on the street or all the hidden homeless folks, like the federal government's Housing First program, which eliminated women who couch surfed. They were not homeless because they had slept on their friend's couch at one night within a 6-month period. So like, if you don't have the financial resources to fight for your rights, your basic rights for housing, for school, for water, we don't have clean water in this country. How are we supposed to fight the little tiny battles when the big honking ones are over top of us all the time? Like, abuse, I think, would diminish if we start tackling the building blocks that keep abusers in those positions of power. If we had available, deeply affordable or socialized housing, if we had guaranteed food, if we had guaranteed medical care, because this country, like we talked about prescriptions, will diagnose you for free, but you gotta pay to fix it. That is not a universal healthcare system. No. That's robbery. Like, we have to start dealing with those big blocks before these little ones are ever going to go anywhere.
Yeah. And in the meantime, provide people access to lawyers and increase eligibility criteria for legal aid. It's astronomically low in BC. I don't know what it's like in other provinces. It is, you literally have to be so impoverished to be eligible for legal aid, and you have to be very rich to afford a lawyer at least $350 an hour and a $5,000 retainer. That's why RISE exists, is to try and close that gap in between who can get legal aid and who can afford a lawyer. And like, we can't close that gap. It's huge. And people are still self-representing because nobody wants to fund a free lawyer for a woman to leave violence.
And I think like that, sorry, I was just gonna say, I think like that's such an important point, like when we're thinking about the trade-offs that people are considering, right? If they are in an abusive relationship and they're thinking about the trade-offs when it comes to, do I stay in this relationship, or do I potentially lose all my access to resources, right? We so often are not actually thinking about the trade-offs that people are considering each and every day. And all of those like complexity on complexity of barriers that are adding to those trade-offs make it virtually impossible. And then we wonder why we don't have accurate stats reporting, or we wonder why we don't have an understanding of the huge amount of violence that we're actually seeing that is hidden underneath the surface, right? Because we actually only see a fraction of that because the system, or the whatever is in place, all kinds of things are in place to make that impossible for people to actually feel like they can take those trade-offs, and the trade-off of leaving or of getting support is worth it.
Yes. That's it. Just yes. I think you've brought up, there's been so much brought up. I really considered, or thinking about the onus being put on the survivor, that needs to be that is so present in every aspect that we talk about. You need to prove it for housing, you need to prove it for the police, you need to prove it for this. Even to access some services, you need to have proof that you were a victim. So I think that everybody has brought up such important elements of solutions based thoughts, I guess. I really like the macro and looking at it from a harm perspective. That really makes me think of like the restorative justice processes, where we talk about that it's not just harming the victim, it's harming the community, and that's what we're trying to prepare through a restorative process. But just before we end, because we are at 53 after the hour, because everyone's in a different time zone, I won't say the first 1 hour. I wanted to just ask Samantha. There was a question for you in the chat. So it asked wants to ask you about trends you may be seeing in BC about.
Oh, Natalie, I think you're frozen.
Oh, okay.
I can answer the question.
Okay, you see the question there? Okay.
I do, yeah.
Okay,
This
great.
is super common in BC, actually. I have several clients where the court has actually ordered mediation, which means that the client actually has to go to mediation, which is really problematic in situations where it's not a good fit. Often mediators are one of the legal professionals in BC that do require mandatory family violence training, which is ironic because mediation is a terrible place for someone to go that's experiencing violence. So the irony in that just gets me every time. But with that said, there are some programs in BC. We have an organization called Access Pro Bono that does help mitigate the prevalence of violence by providing shuttle mediation. So the two parties never actually have to be in the same space together. So in situations where it might be mandated by the court, there are some like tiny solutions to help make it less shitty, excuse my language, for our clients. But yeah, it is really common that it's encouraged. Often, I think abusers know that it's a place where they can utilize their coercive tactics. For example, even just like the intimidation of like physical body language, if they have to be in the same room. A great thing about being online is being able to put sticky notes over the abuser or the perpetrator of violence so that the client doesn't actually have to see them. But it is a really, really common thing. And people often are like, oh, just stay out of court. It's easier. It's less expensive. It's actually really expensive to do mediation as well, unless you go through a free program. So it's, to me, not really a solution in a lot of ways. Some clients prefer it and think that their OP will be, sorry, that means opposing party. That's my legal lingo. The perpetrator of violence will be less triggered by mediation than by court, because like a judge or somebody like looking over them and being able to review what they're doing and witness them will be less triggering for them to be in mediation. But again, I'm not quite sure if I'm not someone who encourages a client to go to mediation. I'll put it that way.
Thank you. Yeah. I noticed a number of the chats that some other provinces also use that. Well, I saw in Ontario, that isn't a common practice, arbitration or mediation.
It's not a common practice?
That's what somebody commented.
Oh,
maybe I misread that.
Interesting.
Hard to get mediation, arbitration, legal support. Oh, sorry, not in Ontario. So we don't have that here.
We have a really significant mediation program. We have a few of them. We have Mediate BC and different things, and rosters of mediators that you can hire as well.
Oh, wow.
Some of them will do sliding scale, which can be helpful. Our legal aid program also covers it if you have legal aid and you are eligible, which is hard to do. So
yeah.
Natalie.
Yeah.
Can I saw a question about education, and
sure.
That has been my obsessive piece of lately, because I work at a micro level. I work at an organization that gets to shout at a macro level. Yet I am still confused that if we're just going to continue working with folks who've experienced violence, how are we going to change the world? How are we going to end violence? So we kind of put our money where our mouth is. We raised $100,000 and we created an e-course called empoweringthem.ca. And it is an e-course here in Newfoundland and Labrador that we made. And really, we centered the user as Uncle Tommy from a very, very tiny community. So it's not just about, there's so much of our work out there that's about what people leaving relationships or people still in violent relationships can do and what they can access. And what we did instead was we wanted to talk about folks who might be inflicting violence in their relationships, as well as people who are experiencing violence, as well as friends, family, co-workers, because like in the workplaces where so much of those experiences get communicated to other people. So we wanted to really empower them, our communities, our people, our friends, our families. So we created this video. It's a 2-hour e-course for free. We are still having problems getting people to look at a free e-course. That is how buried under the carpet this work still is. Like, no, everybody says, no, don't get any on me, not me. I'd never do that. I'd never be in this. So I just a plug for that course. I think it's a really great course. Nothing is perfect, but it's also ASL. We really wanted to walk the walk to make something accessible for people. So it's in the chat.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
I mean, we're pretty much out of time, but I think you also brought up a really good point, Dana, with it's not just about behavioral or changes needed or changes from the victim. It's everything else too that you know, as a society that we aren't doing more to make changes, to stop the behavior, to call people like bystander intervention, and we call, and you know, making that change and standing up when it's your son or your best friend is the one who is part of this, and how we treat other people in relationships and so on. But
especially because it can be so hard to identify, right?
Yes.
Like really coercive violence can be so hard to see, and you might not realize. Most of my clients, when I'm doing a family violence screen, don't realize they've been experiencing violence until we have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it can be like very devastating, obviously, for people to realize, oh my God, this is what I've been experiencing. I didn't think it was me. I didn't think that was me. Right. So helping people identify these things and give language to people to use.
Yeah.
And Natalie, what you brought up around, you know, the bystander, we didn't get to this question, but there was a question originally around what can financial institutions do? But I think in general, there's a huge opportunity in informal supporters, right? There's a stat, and I can't remember exactly where it is, but it says 80% of people who are experiencing violence, they don't tell a social worker or a police officer first. They're telling a family, a friend, a yoga teacher, a hairdresser, somebody in their community that they trust. And that they trust with that information. And so if we can equip society, if we can equip communities to have positive social responses, including places like financial institutions and places where people have that ability to have power and have that positive social response, we're also then starting to reshape how we understand abuse and coercive control.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do in this country. That's what we're trying to do in Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, when you create a course that you want to give to government so that they can press play, like we're a year in now going, hi, we got this great course, it's free, it's well researched, it's evidence-based, and it's actually accessible with language. Do you want to use it? Oh, do we need that?
Just really quickly to build on what Amy said, I know we have to go, but one thought that I had with the financial institutions is there are screening tools that bankers are trained on to identify elder abuse. What if we had something similar for financial and economic abuse in relationships? And are there identifiers that people could be trained on and how to potentially navigate that and deal with it?
So funny you mentioned that. That is actually something that CCFWE right now is we are working on validating the instrument to be used to identify economic abuse. Right, we started with shelters, but we're looking at legal and financial institutions is on our list. So we are we are looking, if there's anybody who's also interested, I'll make a little plug for our screening tool to help validate the instrument. Please let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. But Michaela's the lead on it, but it's Michaela and I are policy analysts working on it. And that's one of our goals for 2023. So thank you. I really just want to say, I see Natalie's on the screen, which means our time is up. But it has been such a wonderful discussion. Again, I think most of us could speak about this for hours, and the chat has been blowing up with people's experiences, their work, and it is just so it was so thrilling and interesting. And I just really want to thank all of you for joining us from across Canada. And it really just shows how, although it's different, but very similar, that all of the experiences within work and violence is across the nation. So thank you. Merci. Miigwech. I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. And I think this proves that there's so much more to say, to share, and to do. I hope that we can come back together for another panel discussion, perhaps in the new year. I know that we are planning some other webinars, perhaps not like a summit format, but we need to continue having these conversations. These conversations do not end here. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time to support. And I appreciate the work, and I think I echo everyone's sentiment that we appreciate the work that you all do in this space. Thank you, Dr. Snow. I know you're getting ready for another panel discussion later this afternoon. I am now going to stop the recording as we move into our fireside chat